I'm Shirley Wells from Watermark Books in Wichita, Kansas, and I was part of the Indies Introduce panelists, panel of readers, and we were privileged enough to read this first collection of short stories by Patrick Dacey. We've already gone this far. And so, welcome, Patrick.
Thank you.
I want to talk about something I noticed in the very beginning of the book, the quote from Saul Bellow that you included as your epigraph, and I'm going to read it. The strangeness of life, the more you resisted it, the harder it bore down on you. The more the mind opposed the sense of strangeness, the more distortions it produced. What if, for once, one were to yield to it? So, in explaining your choice of this quote, could you also comment on whether you, as a writer, have yielded to the strangeness of life?
Well, sure, I have yielded to the strangeness of life. I think as a writer and as a human being, you have to, or else, your head will explode, because there's just so much information coming at us all the time. So, especially in the book and in my own life as a writer, I believe, feeling that, life itself is strange, and I write realism, but realism doesn't have to be this dark, moody thing all the time. It can be funny, it can be chaotic, it can be awesome, it can be sublime, it can be beautiful, and so it can be all those things at once, and that's what's strange about it.
And so that's why you chose the quote?
That's why, and Saul Bellow is a big influence, and also there's a spiritual aspect, I think, to the whole thing, and that he believes in a lot of his work. There was a spiritual kind of guide in a way, and I felt like that kind of hung over everything in his work, and it sort of hangs over everything in my work.
So you see that that's the connection you have with Saul Bellows.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. So which characters in particular in the book do you feel like have yielded to the strangeness of life more perhaps than the others?
Probably a lot of the children that are forced to, or not children, the youngsters, 11, 12, 13-year-olds have to yield to these. Their parents are all mixed up, and it's sort of like the children become the parents, and the parents become the children.
What story would be a good example of that?
There's one where it's a story, Never So Sweet, where the child is an 8-year-old, his uncle is killed, and his uncle's girlfriend comes to stay with him, and his father takes up an affair with the girlfriend. So the kid is trying to balance his affinity for this woman, but also his kind of hatred towards his father, and so he feels sort of constantly on guard. And I also think there's a story in there, to feel again the kind of love. To feel again the kind of love that hurts something terrible is the name of the story.
Yeah.
And so the kid in there, he's autistic.
I love that story.
Yeah, and he's going on his first date. Now his father is a drunkard, he's had 3 DUIs, and his father has to take him on the date, and what's funny is his father has to blow into the breathalyzer every time to get him there. So it becomes, but his father thinks he's the normal person, and the kid thinks he's the screw-up.
Mm-hmm.
But in effect, it's more the father than it is the son. So I think I would lean towards having more affinity for the sons. But the sons and fathers, they take up a lot of the collection.
Is there a personal reason for that?
Yeah, my father, a lot of, what's in here, the recession, he went through that in 1990. He was a builder, and he went bankrupt. And he started seeing another woman, and he went and moved to Las Vegas to become a professional gambler.
Wow.
And so that didn't work out, obviously, and he did door-to-door sales, so I would travel out there, and I would see him a few weeks a year, and then I started doing door-to-door sales, and then eventually I moved out there for a year. But we never had, we were close, but we didn't really get too close until we realized how hard it was to make a buck, in a way. Because I remember when he first went bankrupt, he got this big ATM machine, and it was back before ATM machines were in every store, and we would just lug it from place to place, and we put it back in the back of his Jeep Wagoneer, and we'd take it to convenience stores and say, look, this thing is going to be big. You know,
Oh.
he was at the start. He was always at the start. He was always at the ground floor before it became big. And he would, you know, we would bring the ATM machine in the store, and you know, we went to strip clubs, we went to liquor stores, and I was 11 at the time, and you know, we were trying to sell these ATM machines, but
This explains quite a bit.
I think so.
About the book.
I think so.
I'm going to ask you one last question, and it has to do with the way you've already mentioned here how some of your characters are quite flawed, and yet usually lovable. And so, as a writer, how do you find and bring out that humanity in these quite flawed characters?
Well, look, we're all flawed and we're all lovable, and we were all extremely loved when we were born. And I feel that when, you know, my son was born. And so you know that, especially when you have children, and then you see, you know, people who were born and loved most likely when they were children, and now they're flawed as adults. And we don't respect that, you know, we don't respect, you know, people as human beings. It's almost like we respect animals more than we do human beings. And so I do think one of the big things is this feeling of wanting to return to that feeling of being loved, and wanting to return to that feeling of loving something so much that way, but you just get so caught up in the world bearing down on you. And so, but if you can, that's really the goal, I think, is to feel that love and to express that love. But with that idea of love comes hate, comes war, comes violence, comes comedy, comes everything. You know, it all breeds and stems from that idea of wanting to get back to that feeling you had when you were younger and you were loved.
I think that's great. That sums up your book story collection very well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Wow, thank you.